The story started for me the way most of these things do, not with first-hand experience but with overheard talk. A truck stop in Ozona, midnight coffee thick as tar, bacon grease curling in the air, and men in worn caps telling each other things you don't read in the papers. They spoke of a stretch of FM road that ran off the main highway into Crockett County scrubland, where mesquite and cedar crowd close, and the wind cuts the silence into shreds. One man said the bridge still stood in fog, even though the Pecos had taken it down in the 70s. Another swore he had seen headlights climb into the sky as if chasing a road that wasn't there, then drop into black water. The younger drivers laughed, but not hard. You don't laugh too much when someone with 30 years on the road tells you the map lies. Weeks later, I was rerouted off I-10 on account of a jackknifed rig outside Sonora. I had a load of auto parts and the dispatcher said to take FM 2397 through Crockett to cut back west. Fog had rolled in by then, thick and low, clinging to the ground like it had weight. My headlights bored 2 narrow tunnels ahead of me, and beyond them everything disappeared. The road dipped, and when it came back up there was a bridge. It stretched into the fog, rails silvered with dew. I slowed down, heart thumping. I remembered what I had overheard, and suddenly every mile I had ever driven felt like it had been leading here. The first planks rumbled under my tires, wood warped by years of sun and rain. The Pecos ran dark beneath, though in fog I couldn't see it, only hear it whispering against its banks. I gripped the wheel tight, telling myself it was just an old bridge, nothing more. Halfway across, something shifted. The guardrail to my right flickered, not like a light, but like a mirage. I leaned forward. The far end of the bridge was dissolving into fog. It didn't fade like mist, it tore, unraveling in strips. My headlights landed on empty air. No road, no boards, no exit. I pressed the accelerator. My rig rattled forward and the bridge was gone. Beneath me there was nothing but black space, and for a heartbeat my stomach dropped the way it does when an elevator cable snaps in a dream. The Pecos roared up at me, then violent and sudden I slammed down onto asphalt. My teeth clacked together, my chest hit the wheel, and I almost lost control. But I was on solid road again, trembling, brakes screeching as I fought the wheel to the shoulder. Behind me, the bridge was gone. Only fog curling over a wide river and the faint glint of water where the moon struck through. I sat there for an hour, sweat drying cold under my shirt. When I finally moved, I drove until dawn without stopping. The next day I doubled back under the sun, thinking I'd find some explanation. The FM road cut clean to the river, then ended at 2 broken pylons standing in mud, half swallowed by cattails. Locals said the bridge had been washed away 40 years ago and the county rerouted the traffic rather than rebuild. But I talked to a rancher who had found a sedan in the river the year before. Driver drowned inside, headlights still shining underwater. He spat tobacco and said, "People see a bridge where there ain't one, and when they trust it, the river keeps them." I told myself I was tired. That fog and fear make men see things. But 2 weeks later in El Paso, a driver with sunken eyes found me outside a truck stop. He asked if I'd been on 2397 that night. He said he'd been behind me, saw my taillights on the bridge. Then, in a blink, I was gone. If he hadn't hit the brakes, he said, he would have been swallowed whole. His voice shook when he told me, like he was still standing on the edge of it. I don't take that road anymore. I'll sit in hours of traffic before I follow a GPS reroute back through Crockett County. Because some bridges are gone, washed away by time, but in fog they come back to trick the living. They rise from the river like ghosts of steel and timber, waiting for headlights to touch them. And when they do, the bridge pulls you in. The Pecos is dark and deep, and if you listen on foggy nights, they say you can see beams of light shimmering from beneath the surface, where trucks and cars lie, in silence, their engines cold, their drivers staring forever at the place where the road just ended. Lubbock nights have a way of stretching out longer than they should, the flat land holding the dark like a secret. I was driving west out of town after visiting an old friend, the highway running straight and empty, when the fog rolled in from nowhere. Out on the plains you expect dust storms, the red grit rising like smoke across the fields, but fog that thick in early autumn was strange. The kind of strange that makes your stomach tighten. I slowed down to 40, headlights barely, cutting a yellow cone through the gray, and that was when I saw the sign, Red Barn Diner. The arrow below it pointed left down a cracked access road. The neon letters buzzed faintly even though the place had been shuttered since the 70s, or so people said. My father used to mention it when we passed through, back when I was a kid. He said the pancakes were stacked high as fence posts and the jukebox was always spinning Merle Haggard. Then one summer in 1976, the diner closed overnight, and no one ever really explained why. Some said the owner disappeared. Some said the health inspectors shut it down after finding something in the meat freezer that wasn't beef. Whatever the truth. The Red Barn sat empty for decades, a long, low shape half hidden by mesquite and weeds. I don't know why I turned off the highway. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because the fog gave the road a dreamlike pull. My tires crunched gravel as I crept along the overgrown lane, and soon the building came into view. The barn-shaped roof leaned to one side, shingles missing, red paint peeling in long strips. A tall Coca-Cola sign leaned at the edge of the lot, the bottle faded to a ghost of green. I parked out front and cut the engine, but the headlights stayed on a moment longer, spilling across the glass door and its crooked closed sign. Then I heard it, faint and almost drowned by the hiss of fog. Music. Not the thump of bass from some car stereo, but old country twang, steel guitar, and a low drawl. I recognized the voice without knowing why. It was Patsy Cline, Sweet Dreams, playing like a needle dragged across a dusty vinyl. The sound drifted out from inside the diner. I told myself it was a trick of the fog, some stray signal from a radio tower, but deep down I knew better. The windows were coated in grime, but when I leaned close, I thought I saw shapes moving inside. Figures sitting in booths, hunched over plates, heads bent in silence. My breath fogged the glass, and when I wiped it with my sleeve, the booths were empty, just cracked vinyl and overturned salt shakers. Still, the music carried on. I should have left then, gotten back in my car and headed for the highway, but the door swung open without me touching it. The hinges groaned and the smell hit me. Not rot exactly, but a mix of fried grease and cigarette smoke, stale and clinging. Like the 70s had been sealed up tight in there and left to ferment. I stepped inside. The jukebox stood in the corner by the counter, its colored lights dead, yet the music pulsed from it soft and low. My shoes squeaked on the tile, sticky, as if fresh soda had spilled there just hours ago. A pie case sat behind the counter, glass fogged from the inside, and in it a single slice of cherry pie rested on a plate, crust glistening as though it had just been cut. The booths were lined with dust, but impressions pressed into the cushions suggested people had only recently risen. I walked down the row, heart hammering, and every step seemed to sink me deeper into the past. I half expected to see a waitress in a pink dress and apron step out from the kitchen doors, coffee pot in hand, asking me if I wanted the lunch special. Instead, I saw movement at the far end of the diner. A figure sat in the corner booth, back, to me, shoulders broad beneath a plaid shirt. His head tilted slightly like he was listening to the jukebox. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask if he was real, but the music grew louder, drowning my words. The man turned his head slowly. Where his face should have been, there was nothing but darkness, as if a hole had been carved straight through the world. I staggered back, and the jukebox needle scratched loud across vinyl, the song collapsing into static. The lights flickered on, every bulb buzzing to life, and the diner filled in an instant. Figures appeared in every booth, their faces pale and blurred like photographs left in the sun. Men in cowboy hats, women with beehive hair, children swinging their legs beneath the tables. None of them looked at me. They sat motionless, forks lifted halfway, mouths open as if caught mid-conversation. But no sound came. Only the jukebox, played now bleeding into another song, Hank Williams's voice stretching thin as paper. I backed toward the door, but it had closed tight, the closed sign swinging gently, though no air stirred. My reflection in the glass looked wrong, the fog, outside pressing against it like a living thing. Then I heard whispering. Not from the figures in the booths, but from the walls themselves. words muffled and urgent, dozens of voices overlapping in a chorus of warning or prayer. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound crawled through my skull, naming things I couldn't bear to remember. My father's voice, my grandmother's, a teacher long dead. They all said the same thing in different tongues. Sit down. The figure in the plaid shirt rose. He was taller than I thought, his head nearly brushing the barn rafters and the hole where his face should have been widened. Inside it swirled fog, gray and red, spinning like a storm. He took one step toward me, and every figure in the diner turned their head in unison. Their faces still blurred, but their eyes suddenly clear, bright and wet, fixed on me. My legs buckled and I dropped into the nearest booth. The vinyl squealed under my weight and a plate slid in front of me, steaming hot. A burger stacked high, grease dripping down the bun, fries piled beside it. My stomach twisted with hunger, though I hadn't been hungry before. The whispering stopped. The jukebox clicked. Silence. Only my own breath filled the diner, ragged and shallow. I looked down at the food, then back up. Every figure leaned forward, waiting. The faceless man stood over me, hands hanging loose at his sides. I felt my hand lift on its own, fingers curling around the burger. I bit into it. The taste was copper and rot, blood filling my mouth, and I gagged, choking as laughter erupted all around me. Not joyous laughter, but hollow, like air whistling through empty throats. I spat the meat onto the plate, red and raw, wriggling as though it were alive. The faceless man leaned closer, and I smelled earth and mildew rising from him. The stink of something buried too long. He lowered his head until the hole where his face should be hovered inches from mine. The fog inside spun faster, pulling at me, drawing my breath out of my lungs. My vision tunneled. I clutched at the table, but my fingers slid through it as if it were smoke. Just before the dark took me, I heard one last voice, clear as day. My father's again. Don't stay past 3. When I woke, I was slumped, over my steering wheel on the highway shoulder, engine idling, headlights cutting a path through thin fog. My watch read 3:47 a.m. My mouth tasted of iron and ash, and on the passenger seat sat a napkin, folded neat, with a single word scrawled in red. Come back. I hit the gas and didn't stop until the sun rose. To this day, I don't drive west, out of Lubbock after midnight. And if I ever catch a song drifting faint through the fog, I roll the windows up and keep going. Because some diners never close. Not really. Amarillo sits out there on the edge of the panhandle like a city that never wanted to be built. Windblown, flat, surrounded by pastures and rail lines that stretch until the horizon eats them whole. Folks who've lived there long enough know the highways that skirt its edge carry more than cattle trucks and grain haulers. There's one stretch in particular, a curve on the outer rim where the prairie rolls into a sharp bend, that's earned a reputation ugly enough to make even hardened truckers mutter a prayer before taking it. They call it Dead Horse Curve, and I know the stories better than most. I've seen that blacktop glisten with oil-slick rain and fresh blood, smelled the gasoline vapors that hang in the wind long after the wreckers haul the twisted metal away. I've watched the locals cross themselves as they drove it, and I've seen the faces of men who swore they weren't afraid of anything go pale at what they glimpsed running beside their headlights. It was the summer of 1999 when I took my first job hauling freight runs out of Amarillo, mostly food service loads headed south toward Lubbock or east on I-40. That meant a lot of late-night miles across that scrub country, when the sky is so wide and black you feel like the earth itself has shrunk beneath your rig. The CB chatter kept me company most nights, voices bouncing out of Oklahoma and New Mexico, truckers talking weather and way stations. But there were times when the radio went dead quiet, right as I approached that curve, as if everybody out there in the dark knew enough to shut up until I'd passed it. The first time I heard about the riderless horse, I laughed. Old cowhand story, I figured. Amarillo still had that rodeo town pride, and ranchers drank hard enough to make anything gallop past their headlights. But then a buddy of mine, Tony Delgado, pulled his Kenworth into the yard one dawn, white as a sheet, swearing that a chestnut mare had thundered alongside him for a quarter mile. He said her eyes glowed like tail lights and her mane whipped against the air, though there was no sound of hooves on the asphalt. When she veered off into the weeds, he glanced at the speedometer. He'd been doing 70. A few weeks later, I had my own run-in. The night was dry, wind carrying that baked dust smell you only get on the Panhandle plains. I was hauling a half-loaded trailer, nothing that should have made the rig groan. But as I eased down toward the bend, I felt the wheel stiffen, like the road itself wanted me to fight it. The CB went silent, and then I saw her. She broke out of the mesquite, at full tilt, a bay horse without tack or rider, muscles slick under the moonlight. She kept perfect pace with me, her head jerking toward the cab like she was daring me to hold her gaze. I remember my mouth going dry as paper, my hand clamped so tight on the wheel it ached. Right as we reached the curve, she cut left across my bumper. I slammed the brakes, horn screaming, rubber burning hot across asphalt. My trailer fishtailed but didn't tip. She vanished into nothing. Not into the brush. Not down the embankment. Just gone, like she'd never been there at all. I sat shaking, on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking into the night while a pair of headlights in the distance grew closer. Another trucker, slowing down, rolling past without a word. He didn't have to say anything. I could see in his face that he'd seen her too. From that night on, Dead Horse Curve stopped being just a stretch of road to me. It felt like a wound cut into the earth. Locals say the name came from a wreck in the 70s, a horse trailer jackknifing in a storm, animals spilling out and crushed under wheels. Others say it goes back further, to the Dust Bowl days when a rancher lost everything and hung himself from the cottonwood at the bend, leaving his horse to starve beside the post. The histories bleed into each other until you can't tell where truth ends and ghost story begins. But here's what I know for certain. I've seen more fresh crosses planted on that stretch of ground than anywhere else in the county. White, wood, sometimes with faded plastic flowers wired to them, sometimes just bare sticks hammered into the ditch. People die there, not just wrecks from bad weather or busted brakes. Cars veer too sharp, tires lock, drivers swear they were trying to miss something in the road that no one else can see. Insurance reports don't say horse, but I've stood with the sheriff at the aftermath of a flipped sedan, and I've heard a dying man's last breath push out the word horse. It gets worse. The longer you drive that highway, the more it digs into you. It's not just seeing her once. She comes back, night after night, waiting. A bay sometimes, a chestnut others, occasionally a black stallion, but always riderless, always running alongside with that same hungry stare. My dreams started filling with the thunder of hooves. Only when I woke, my trailer tires were still humming like I'd never stopped driving. Tony stopped hauling Amarillo runs altogether, said he couldn't take it anymore, couldn't bear that moment before the curve when he knew she'd appear. 2 years later, he put his Peterbilt into a ditch outside Tucumcari and never came back. I stuck with it longer, maybe out of stubbornness, maybe out of the paycheck. I told myself it was tricks of dust and light, hallucinations from too much coffee and too little sleep. But last year I came around the bend after a storm. The asphalt gleamed wet, lightning still flickering far off to the east. She was there, pounding the shoulder with legs that never sank into mud, a spray of water that didn't touch the ground. This time she had a rider. I saw him clear as day in that split-second flash of headlights. A man in jeans and a torn shirt, head bent backward at an angle no living body could hold, his arms clamped tight around the horse's neck. His eyes met mine, not glowing but dull, the color of rainwater filling a ditch. Then they were gone, leaving the wet road empty except for my own reflection in the glass. I pulled off at the next truck stop and sat there until sunrise, too afraid to even close my eyes. I haven't taken that road since, and I don't plan to. Still, whenever the wind carries the smell of mesquite and hot asphalt, I feel the phantom rumble of hooves beside me. Out past Amarillo's edge, the horse is still running, and sooner or later, the curve will claim another wreck. Highway 59 through East Texas is a long, straight stretch of blacktop that can lull you into a daze if you let it. I had been driving for hours that night, the air outside thick with pine-scented humidity, my headlights carving narrow tunnels through the dark. I wasn't even supposed to be out there. A work conference in Houston had run late, and instead of grabbing a cheap motel near the city like any sensible man would, I got it in my head I could push through and make it all the way back to Nacogdoches in one go. I figured coffee and a pack of cigarettes would keep me steady, but around 2 a.m, fatigue set in heavy, my eyes gritty and the painted lines blurring into one another. That's when I saw it, a flicker of neon red and green breaking the monotony, a glowing vacancy sign perched on the edge of the trees like a beacon. It startled me because that stretch of Highway 59 wasn't exactly booming with roadside businesses anymore. Most of the old motels had shuttered, the gas stations gone dark, the exits leading to towns where Main Street had more boarded windows than open shops. But there it was, a perfect retro vacancy sign, buzzing faintly like the ones you'd expect in an old Hitchcock film. The letters alternated between glowing vacancy and a dull blink that left the word hollow for a moment before lighting back up. I caught the shape of a low, sprawling building just beyond the sign, brick or maybe stucco, with a front office lit by a pale orange lamp. Relief washed through me. I told myself I'd grab a room, crash for the night, and drive the rest come daylight. Pulling in, my tires crunched over gravel. The place was set back from the road, half hidden by pine trees. The lot looked strangely empty, no other cars but mine, yet the sign insisted rooms were available. I parked near the office, stepped out into the damp air, and caught the smell of char and wet timber, faint but sharp enough to raise goose flesh. It reminded me of an old chimney that had been out of use too long. I shook it off as country air mixed with swamp and mildew. Inside the office, the front desk looked tidy enough, though something about the furniture seemed dated, like it hadn't been replaced in decades. There was a bell sitting on the counter. I rang it, the sound carrying sharp through the quiet. A moment later, a man appeared from the back, tall and lean with slicked back hair and the hollow face of someone who smoked too many cigarettes. His clothes were neat but not modern. White shirt tucked into slacks a little too high on the waist, a thin tie knotted tight. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, sir," he said. His voice was steady, polite, almost rehearsed. "You looking for a room tonight?" "Yeah," I said, setting my ID and card on the counter. "Just need a bed until morning." He nodded, took the card, but instead of swiping it through a reader, he slid out a large ledger book and a fountain pen. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded on names written in looping cursive. He had me sign my name, date, and time. I hesitated, thinking it odd, but I was too tired to argue. He slid a key across the counter, a real metal key attached to a heavy brass tag stamped with the number 6. "End of the row on the right," he said. "Quiet room." I thanked him and stepped back outside. Walking along the row of doors, I noticed how clean everything was, but too clean in the sense of untouched. No scuff marks on the doors, no worn doormats, no cigarette butts in the gravel. The lamps above each doorway glowed steadily, but I saw no flicker from a TV behind curtains, no shadows moving inside. It was as though the rooms were staged, waiting. When I unlocked the door and stepped in, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Smoke again, faint but stronger than outside, layered with something sour beneath it. The room looked normal enough at first glance. Bed with a stiff quilt, a small table with an ashtray, a lamp casting dim light. I dropped my bag, sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed my eyes. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt watched. I tried brushing it off, chalking it up to highway paranoia and exhaustion. I turned on the bathroom light, washed my face, and glanced in the mirror. The glass had a warped ripple down the center, and for the briefest second I swore the reflection wasn't keeping perfect time with my own movements. My stomach nodded. I killed the light, climbed into bed, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing noises in the walls, like soft crackling, wood popping the way it does when heat meets damp. A few times I thought I heard voices in the distance muffled through the plaster like a television left on low. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. I sat up, heart pounding, listening as they passed by my door. slow and heavy, gravel crunching with each step. When I peeked through the blinds, the lot was empty. No one out there. I tried to convince myself it was the desk clerk making his rounds, but the air in that room had gone stifling. I opened the window for a breeze, only to find the frame scorched, along the sill blackened as if it had been licked by flame. I pulled my hand back fast, staring. I wanted to leave, to get in my car and just keep driving, but fatigue anchored me down. At some point I must have dozed because I woke to a loud bang, like a door slamming somewhere nearby. Smoke filled the room, not thick, but a haze that made my throat raw. The light flickered. The quilt beneath me felt hot, almost burning. I stumbled up, coughing, grabbed my bag, and rushed for the door. When I yanked it open, what I saw froze me. The entire row of motel rooms was ablaze, flames roaring through the roof, smoke boiling into the sky. Yet there was no heat, no sound of fire crackling, no sirens in the distance. Just the sight of walls burning and collapsing in silence. And through the smoke I saw people, dozens of them, standing in front of their rooms, their faces pale and blank, clothes blackened and torn as if they'd been pulled from wreckage. They all turned to look at me at once, every head jerking in eerie unison. I staggered back, slammed the door, and pressed my back against it, heart racing so hard it felt like my chest might burst. When I opened my eyes again, the smoke was gone. The room was still, the lamp steady, everything back to normal. I couldn't stay another minute. I grabbed my keys, ran to my car, and sped out of that gravel lot without looking back. The vacancy sign glowed in my rearview mirror until the trees swallowed it. When I reached Nacogdoches at dawn, I told myself it was a dream, hallucinations from exhaustion, maybe even carbon monoxide from a faulty heater. That was the rational explanation. But a week later, curiosity got the better of me. I asked around about that motel off Highway 59. An older guy at a diner laughed. When I mentioned it, "Son, that place burned down back in '72, he said. "Took a whole busload of travelers with it. Church group from up north. Fire started in the office, spread fast. Nobody made it out." I told him I stayed there just last week, signed my name in the ledger, slept in room 6. His smile faded, and he shook his head. "They never rebuilt," he said. "Ain't been nothing there but weeds and ashes for 50 years. I still drive 59 sometimes, but I don't look at the trees anymore. If I catch the faintest glow of neon, I press harder on the gas and keep my eyes fixed on the lines ahead. Because if the hollow motel wants you, it'll find a way to make room, and you won't be checking out come morning." Highway 77 runs long and flat through the scrubland near Raymondville, the kind of stretch where the horizon is a dull line of mesquite and thornbrush, and you can almost believe you're the only soul alive. I was driving it late one summer night, heading back from visiting my aunt in Harlingen, when the GPS chimed in that I was running low on gas. It told me to take the next right, a road I didn't remember from the map, and follow it for 2 miles to a station. I didn't argue. Out there, between Raymondville and the ranchlands, you don't gamble with an empty tank. I turned down the narrow asphalt, weeds licking the edges, and sure enough, after 2 miles, a glow rose up through the brush. A bright white light, not the usual dim sodium orange of Texas highway gas stations, but a flood of pure fluorescent. It made the dust hanging in the air shimmer like mist. The sign said, "Last Stop Gas," letters so new they seemed printed yesterday, though I'd never seen or heard of it in all my drives through that country. The place stood alone, lit like a stage in the middle of nothing. A small rectangular building with glass doors, pumps standing in perfect alignment, each one gleaming as if polished. There wasn't another car in sight, but the open sign buzzed, red in the window and the hum of electricity carried on the still night air. I pulled in, uneasy, but the fuel needle was kissing empty, so there wasn't much choice. I rolled to a stop at pump 3, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled of something faintly sweet, not quite gas fumes, not quite cleaning solvent. The hum of the lights was louder than it should have been, like cicadas living inside the bulbs. I reached for the pump handle, but it wouldn't budge until I slid my card. The little screen blinked awake before I even touched it, asking me to please prepay inside. That's when I saw him. The attendant stood behind the glass doors, hands folded neatly in front of him, head tilted ever so slightly to the left. He wore a crisp blue shirt with a name tag that only had numbers instead of a name. His face was pale, washed flat in the fluorescent glow, and his eyes were wide and unblinking. Even through the glass, I could tell he hadn't blinked once. I froze, card still in hand, and for a long beat the two of us just stared at each other. Then his mouth stretched into a smile, slow and mechanical, and he lifted one hand in a stiff little wave, like someone who'd just learned the gesture. Against all common sense, I walked toward the door. Inside, the air was icy cold, heavy with the smell of ammonia and something metallic underneath. The shelves were fully stocked but off somehow, every can lined up label forward, every row exact to the millimeter. The chip bags were puffed, pristine, colors brighter than they should be, like props more than food. The cooler hummed, but the bottles inside had no condensation, no real chill to the glass. And at the counter he waited, hands folded again, smile, never fading, eyes locked on mine without a flicker. "Evening," I said, voice sounding too loud in that stillness. He didn't answer, only turned his hand palm up, waiting for my card. I slid it across and he ran it through the register without looking down once, not a blink, not even a shift of his pupils. The screen flashed approved, and he pushed a receipt toward me. The paper was blank. I glanced back at him, and for the first time noticed the corners of his eyes. Too sharp, like they'd been drawn in with a ruler. His pupils weren't quite round. They shimmered faintly, reflecting the lights above like glass beads. I wanted to turn and walk out, but he held the receipt out insistently. That thin strip of blank paper. Against my better judgment, I took it, and the moment it touched my hand, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Something changed in the air then. The hum grew deeper, almost a vibration I could feel in my teeth. From the far aisle between the canned goods, a shape shifted. I swear I saw a figure, gray and tall, like someone wrapped in gauze, but when I blinked it was gone. My stomach went tight and I backed toward the door. He was still smiling, still holding his hands neatly folded, still staring, still not blinking. I pumped gas as fast as I could, refusing to look back at the window, though I felt his eyes burning into me the whole time. The pump clicked off at exactly 6.66 gallons, though I hadn't set it to stop. My receipt printed with no numbers, just that same strip of blank white paper. I shoved the nozzle back, jumped into my car, and turned the key. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, the silence pressing in so hard it felt like my ears popped. Then, the engine roared and I slammed it into drive. As I pulled away, I couldn't help glancing in the rear view. The gas station was still lit up bright against the dark scrubland, but the sign no longer read "Last Stop Gas." It was blank, just an empty white board glowing in the night. And the attendant was standing outside now, directly in the middle of the lot, hands at his sides, head tilted, eyes wide and shining, watching me leave, never blinking. I drove until Raymondville's dim streetlights appeared like salvation, and when I pulled into a Valero on the edge of town just to be sure, the attendant there looked at me like I was drunk. He swore there wasn't any station out on that road, hadn't been for years, just a burned-out foundation where a family died in a fire back in the 70s. I didn't argue. I only looked at the gas gauge. It sat steady, full, but the odometer showed 0 miles traveled since I'd left Harlingen. The paper receipt lay on the passenger seat where I'd dropped it, still blank, except now there were faint indentations, letters pressed into it like someone had scratched them from the other side. I held it up to the glow of the dashboard and read 3 words that froze my blood cold. "Next time, stay." The Panhandle sky carries a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but weighted, as though the land itself has a memory it's trying not to share. On the Frost Ranch, where the flat fields roll out for miles until they blur into the faint blue horizon, that silence is broken most often by the steady rasp of the wind combing through dry wheat or scraping against the old windmill blades that creak and whine like tired bones. I worked a season there when I was younger, and I still remember the fence line. You'd see it before you smelled the cattle or caught the glint of water tanks. A straight run of barbed wire stretched tight across miles of pasture, 4 strands deep, nailed to cedar posts gray and splitting from age. It should have been just another fence like thousands across Texas, but it wasn't. That wire sang when the wind came across it, not like a loose strand whining, but like the bow of a violin dragging across a string, clear and sharp, the kind of sound that gets under your skin before you even know you're shivering. The ranch had a reputation before I ever set foot there. Old hands said cattle went missing, not the kind where a rustler cut the wire and hauled them off, but the kind where you'd ride out and find them tangled in that fence, their bodies mauled in a way no coyote or wild dog could manage. Torn open down the middle, ribs peeled back, like fingers, eyes gone. Sometimes the head still alive, mouth working, steam coming from nostrils though the rest of the body looked like it had been fed through a shredder. Ranchers whisper about chupacabra or government experiments, but none of them liked working that stretch. They'd string new posts or tighten the line, but no one lingered after sundown. Not after hearing the hum swell in the dusk when the temperature dropped and the cattle started pacing, their eyes rolling white. The first time I saw it was early October, a dry year when dust coated your teeth and turned your spit to mud. I was helping Earl Frost, the old man who still ran the place even though his sons had left years before. He rode slow and stiff in the saddle, a man more bone than muscle, his hat low, his eyes squinting like he never trusted what he saw. We came up on a black steer half collapsed against the fence, its flank split wide like it had been clawed by something with knives for hands. The barbed wire was clean. No blood on it, not even a hair snagged. Earl spit into the dirt, muttered a prayer, and told me to put the animal down. I could see the steer's chest heave, see its lips try to form a lowing that never came out. When I shot it between the eyes, the sound of the fence line jumped, high and shrill, a note that made the hair on my arms bristle. Earl stared at that wire as if it had answered back. We buried the steer quick and he told me not to talk about it in town. People hear stories, he said, his voice flat like he wasn't giving me advice but an order. Don't feed it. That night I lay in the bunkhouse listening to the wind. At first it was just the normal whistle through gaps in the boards, the shuffle of dirt blowing across the yard. But then came that sound again, faint at first, like a bow touching a string in the distance, then louder, carrying a low drone that pressed into my chest. I swore I felt it vibrate through the mattress frame. No coyotes yipped, no owls hooted, just that wire singing in the dark like something alive. I asked one of the older ranch hands, a man named Carlos, if he'd ever heard it. He looked at me for a long time before he said yes, but that it was better to leave it alone. He told me once, back when he was younger, he'd followed the sound down the fence line on a night when it wouldn't stop. He swore the posts were shaking, trembling like there was weight pulling at the wires. He saw shapes in the dark fields moving against the stars. Too tall to be men, too fast to be deer. He ran back and never looked again. When I pressed, he told me the Frost family had fenced that land differently a long time ago. His uncle said the posts were set not where they needed to keep cattle in, but where something else needed to be, kept out. But it's on this side now, Carlos said, his voice barely above a whisper, and it don't go back. One cold dawn I found Earl sitting at the fence, his back against a post, shotgun across his knees. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his skin as pale as the frost dusting the ground. When I asked if he was all right, he just nodded toward the wire. The wind was dead still, but the barbs were trembling, quivering like a guitar string after you pluck it. He told me about his father, how in the 30s a whole herd of cattle had been found along this same stretch, gutted clean, 30 head in a single night. His father swore the wire had kept humming for days, until even the grass around it withered and turned black. Earl's voice shook when he said it wasn't about the cattle, not really. It's a warning, he told me. Every time it starts again, something worse follows. 2 weeks later, it did. We found 3 cows one morning, each torn apart, but not eaten. Their innards spilled neat in the dust like a butcher had laid them out. The ground around them was churned like there'd been a struggle, but there were no prints, no tracks, just lines in the dirt. long and straight, as though something had been dragged sideways under the earth. That night the humming never stopped. It grew higher, sharper, until I thought the barbs would snap. I sat in the bunkhouse clutching the rifle Earl had given me, sweat running down my back though the air was freezing. Around midnight I heard a different sound. A low moaning like cattle, only stretched, warped, and carried with it a human edge. The kind of sound that makes your stomach knot. I didn't go to the window. I didn't want to see what was making. By morning another steer was gone, not dead, gone. The fence stood unbroken, the ground undisturbed. Earl stopped eating, stopped shaving, just sat by that fence with his shotgun, muttering under his breath like he was trying to memorize. Prayers. Carlos quit. Packed his things in silence and drove away without saying goodbye. When I asked Earl if we should leave too, he told me no. If you go, he said, it'll follow. It knows who's heard it. Best you stay till it passes. His eyes were red and wet, but his voice was steady. The night it came for him, the whole ranch knew it. The fence screamed, not hummed, a note so loud and sharp it shattered glass in the bunkhouse windows. I ran out with the others, the cold biting my lungs, and we saw Earl standing at the line, shotgun raised. The ground around him rippled like water, the soil shifting in waves. Shadows rose behind him, too many legs, too many shapes folding and unfolding like smoke trying to be solid. Earl fired once, twice, the muzzle flash lighting his face, twisted in rage or terror, I couldn't tell which. Then the fence went silent, dead silent, and he was gone. No body, no hat, nothing. Just the shotgun lying in the dirt, twisted like it had been melted, and the wire humming faint again, soft as a sigh. I left the next morning. Didn't take pay, didn't pack much, just got in my truck and drove until the land rose enough that I couldn't see that fence line in the mirror anymore. I heard later that the Frost Ranch shut down. No buyers, no cattle, just empty fields and that same fence running through it. Folks say if you drive by at night with your windows down, you'll hear it. That strange clear note rising and falling with the wind. Some say Earl still walks it, a dark shape moving post to post, keeping watch. Others swear the cattle that vanish out there aren't dead at all but waiting, penned somewhere beyond the wire, waiting for the day it breaks. I don't know the truth. All I know is when I think of that sound, that sharp singing in the night air, my hands shake, and I feel the same weight in my chest I did that season. Like the land is holding something under its skin, and the fence is the only thing keeping it from tearing free. And I wonder how much longer it can hold. The Brazos River has always had its way of reminding folks that it isn't tame, no matter how many levees and drainage ditches men put in place. Down in the bottomland, the soil is dark and rich, good for crops, but it comes at a cost. Every spring and summer, when the storms roll through central Texas, the water overflows, swallowing up fields, fence posts, and sometimes whole barns. My grandfather's place sat right in the heart of that bottomland, a sagging patch of land hemmed in by pecan trees and mud. And at the edge of it all was the old barn. By the time I was a boy, it had already leaned half an inch off true. The red paint peeled away into gray streaks, the roof patched with tin sheets. Folks didn't much talk about it in daylight, but at night, when storms passed and the river spread, you'd hear stories. Lanterns glowing inside, swinging slow behind the boards, though the barn was half underwater. No one ever said they went to check. They just told the story, voices hushed, like it was enough to pass it on and never look too close. The first time I saw it myself was the spring of '92. I was 16 then, old enough to be restless, dumb enough to ignore warnings. It had rained for 3 days straight, thunder rattling the windows at night, sheets of rain turning the dirt roads to rivers. On the fourth morning, the sun broke through, and all that water shimmered across the bottomland. Pecan branches dripped, steady, the ground soft as pudding. The barn stood out there in the middle of it, water up past the doors, half the walls dark with soaking. And sure enough, plain as day, a yellow glow shone through the slats. I thought at first it was the sun catching something metal inside, but no. It was steady, flickering, like a real flame. A lantern flame. My heart stuttered, but I felt this pull, The kind that makes you walk towards something when every sensible bone in your body is telling you to back away. I waded in, boots filling with water, jeans clinging to my legs. I remember the smell. River mud, wet hay, and something sharp under it like burnt oil. The closer I got, the clearer the glow became. It moved slow, side to side, like someone was pacing with a lantern in their hand. When I reached the big sliding door, swollen shut with rain, I stopped. The water came halfway up my thighs, cold enough to bite, and the boards shivered faintly like something was moving behind them. I pressed my ear against the wood. There was a sound, low and irregular. Not footsteps exactly, but a dragging, scraping noise. I stepped back then, my chest hammering, and I swear I saw a hand, just the outline of one, press against the inside wall. Not a shadow, not light playing tricks. A pale hand, long fingers, pressing against the wood as if testing it. The lantern, glow flared bright behind it, and I stumbled back so fast I nearly went under. By the time I regained my footing, the glow had gone. The barn stood silent and wet, just an empty ruin again. I told myself I imagined it, that my mind had twisted rain reflections into something they weren't. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside had been watching me just as close as I was watching it. Years later, after I left the farm, the stories kept floating back to me. Ranch hands talking about cattle found dead near the waterline, bloated and torn, as if they'd tried to wade out to the barn and something had gotten to them. Kids swore they heard voices when they passed by on bikes, hushed whispers threading through the slats. One boy told me he saw a man standing waist-deep in floodwater at the barn door, lantern in hand, his head tilted like he was waiting. When the boy blinked, the man was gone, but the water rippled like something had slid under the surface. By the time my grandfather died, I'd convinced myself I needed to see it again, if only to prove the memory wrong. It was the spring of 2004, another wet year, the Brazos running wide. I drove out alone, parked by the fence, and trudged down into the bottomland. The barn leaned worse than before, sagging like it might collapse any day. The water lapped high against the boards, dark and cold, and damned if that light wasn't there again, flickering steady, casting lines of gold across the water. I told myself I'd open the door this time. I'd go in. I slogged forward, breath sharp in my chest. The boards creaked as I laid my hands on them. They felt warm. Warm in the middle of a flood, warm like someone's skin. The scraping started again, louder now, a slow drag across wood. I shoved the door hard, and with a groan it gave way just enough for a gap. The lantern glow spilled over me, bright as a campfire, and standing there, waist deep in black water, was a figure. It wasn't clear, not fully solid, like river mist packed tight into a man shape. Its face was pale, too pale, and its eyes glowed faint like coals. The lantern in its hand burned steady, but the flame never wavered though the water lapped at it. The smell of burnt oil rose strong, gagging me. I froze, unable to move, and it tilted its head slow, the same way that boy had described, like it was waiting. I don't remember turning, but I was on the bank again, coughing up mud, my arms cut where barbed wire snagged me. I never heard it move, never heard the door close. Just that dragging sound echoing behind me, like something pulling itself along. After that, I stayed away. I never went back. But the barn never fell, not all the way. Even when storms split oak trees and washed out roads, that structure clung stubborn as bone. And always, after the waters came, somebody swore they saw the glow. Neighbors, ranch hands, kids sneaking out to prove they weren't scared. Always the same, a lantern burning steady where no flame should live, deep inside that drowned shell. Sometimes late at night I dream of it. I dream of the water closing in, of the boards warm against my hands, of the lantern glow spilling over me like it's searching for something. And I wake with that smell in my nose, burnt oil, sharp and heavy. Folks around there don't question it much anymore. They just shake their heads, keep clear when the floods come, and tell the story the same way they always have. But I know better. I know there's something still inside, waiting for anyone foolish enough to open that door and step all the way in. The black water tank sat on the edge of Dallas like a forgotten landmark, something half hidden behind scrub brush and rusted chain-link fencing. For years it had stood there, its massive cylindrical body looming over the flat stretch of land, near an old rail line, a relic from when that part of the city had been nothing but fields and cattle pens. By the time kids started sneaking out there with boards and spray cans, it was more skeleton than tower, the ladders half-eaten by corrosion, the outer skin blotched with streaks of brown and orange. It was dangerous, sure, but that only made it more appealing. The cops didn't bother with it anymore, too far out, too much trouble. Everyone in town had heard stories. How roughnecks used it for target practice, how a kid once slipped inside and drowned when it still held water, how you could hear knocking if you pressed your ear to the metal on a still night. None of that stopped the teenagers from skating its base, carving shaky kickflips across the cracked concrete pad that ringed the tank like a forgotten altar. It was late August, humid as only Texas can be, when Ryan and his friends rolled up to the tank. The cicadas were buzzing hard in the tree line, and the air smelled like hot dirt and rust. They had 2 cars between them, trunks full of cheap beer and a boombox spitting distorted bass. By the time they dragged their boards over the gravel, sweat was already running down their backs, their shirts sticking. The tank loomed above them, its peeling black paint catching the last of the sun. It looked like something out of a nightmare, but to them it was just a place where nobody would yell at them for trespassing. Ryan dropped his board down and kicked off, wheels rattling over the uneven slab. His buddy Miguel tried to ollie off a chunk of broken rebar, wiped out, then laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. They were all shouting, joking, carrying on like kids do when they're trying to forget the world is bigger and meaner than they are. They skated until twilight bled into the edges of the sky, the horizon turning the same bruise-colored purple as the tank. Someone lit a cigarette, passed it around, the beer cans stacked into little towers near the cars. By then, the bugs had grown so loud it was like standing next to a power line, the droning filling their ears until it was hard to hear each other. Ryan set his board against the side of the tank, leaned close to tie his laces, and that's when he noticed it. A patch of the rust seemed darker than the rest. At first he thought it was just the light fading, but when he tilted his head, he swore it had shape to it. A curve like a cheek, a hollow like an eye socket. He blinked, shook his head, but when he looked again, the pattern was still there. More distinct now, like the corrosion had arranged itself into something deliberate. "Yo, check this out," he called, his voice sounding thinner than he meant it to. Miguel ambled over, wiping sweat from his forehead. He squinted at the spot. "Looks like a stain, man. You're seeing things." But as the others came closer, their chatter fell quiet. One by one they leaned in, eyes narrowing, and the joking atmosphere that had hung all evening started to bleed away. The rust had formed into something too uncanny to dismiss. It was a face, no doubt about it. Not some cartoonish shape you'd laugh off, but a gaunt human face etched into the tank's surface, as if it had been waiting there beneath the paint all along. The eyes were hollow pits, the mouth a stretched grimace. The shadows deepened as the night grew thicker, and for a moment, it almost seemed like the lips twitched. Nobody said anything. They just stood there, the boombox still buzzing faintly. Behind them, the cicadas screaming like they were being fried alive. Ryan finally broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "It's just rust, y'all. Just rust." But his voice cracked when he said it, and the others didn't answer. They tried to shake it off. They turned the music up louder, skated harder, whooping and hollering to drown the unease. But no matter how far they moved around the slab, every time they glanced back at the tank, the face seemed clearer, sharper, as if it was pressing outward from inside the steel. By 10 o'clock, the air had cooled only a little, but everyone's shirts were cold with sweat anyway, their nerves buzzing worse than the bugs. Miguel finally chucked his board in the trunk and said he'd had enough. The others gave him shit for it, but not much, because truth be told, they all felt the same creeping dread. The sense that something was watching them from the tank's corroded skin. That was when the knocking started. Soft, like knuckles on hollow wood. 3 slow raps that came from inside the tower. Everyone froze. The sound echoed faintly, traveling up the steel walls. One of the girls, Emily, Ryan thought, squeaked and grabbed her friend's arm. Miguel swore under his breath. Nobody moved toward the tank. They just stared, waiting. A few seconds passed, then 3 more knocks, louder this time. It was like someone trapped inside, begging to be let out. Ryan swallowed hard. It's just metal expanding, right? Heat and stuff. But it was nighttime. The tank should have been cooling, contracting, not knocking like fists on a coffin. Then came a sound none of them could explain. A dragging like nails raking slowly across the inner wall. Long, screeching pulls that set everyone's teeth on edge. The sound circled the inside of the tank, moving steadily, impossibly, like something was pacing in there. Emily bolted first. She ran to her car, shouting for the others to hurry. The rest followed, boards clattering, cans tipping. Ryan looked back just once as he fumbled his keys. In the glow of the headlights, the face in the rust was smiling. Not a vague trick of shadow anymore, but a wide, unmistakable grin stretching across the corroded steel. They peeled out, gravel spitting behind them, music still blasting in the trunk. No one talked on the ride back into town. Their laughter from earlier had been sucked out, replaced by a silence that clung like humidity. When Ryan dropped Miguel off, his friend wouldn't look him in the eye. Nobody mentioned meeting up again at the tank. Nobody had to. Whatever they'd seen wasn't something you messed with twice. In the days that followed, Ryan tried to convince himself it had been a trick of the light, a shared illusion brought on by beer and nerves. But every night when he lay down, he saw that face again, those rusted sockets staring back at him in the dark. A week later, he heard that Emily's car had gone off the road near the rail crossing. No skid marks, no explanation. 2 days after, that Miguel stopped coming to school. His mom saying he was too shaken up after a break-in at their house where nothing was stolen, but the walls were scratched deep, like with metal claws. Ryan stopped asking questions. One night, too restless to sleep, he drove past the outskirts where the tank sat. The moon was high, throwing silver across the landscape. The tower loomed, its paint darker than ever. He slowed his car without meaning to, eyes locked on that spot. In the pale light, the face was still there, sharper than before, its features carved deep into the steel as though the rust itself had been sculpted. And though his windows were up and his engine running, he swore he heard it. A hollow knock, 3 times echoing inside his chest. Ryan hit the gas and didn't look back. He never told anyone else about that night, but he knew the truth then. The tank wasn't abandoned. It was hungry. And every kid who rolled up to skate there was just another offering. Another story whispered through the metal. Another soul staring out from the rust. The old schoolhouse on FM 402 still leans in the middle of a stretch of dry scrubland where mesquite trees claw the sky and prairie dogs vanish down their burrows at the first sound of tires. Most of the travelers on that farm-to-market road don't notice it. They speed past with the windows rolled up and the air conditioning on, the radio turned high enough to drown out the rattling of the loose gravel. The paint's long gone, stripped by decades of summer sun and winter winds. What's left of the boards are gray and warped, and the windows are nothing but frames holding jagged pieces of glass. Crows perch on the roof's broken spine and scatter whenever a truck goes by. If you stop long enough, you'll hear the prairie winds move through the hollow structure, carrying with it a thin, high sound that more than one person has sworn was the echo of children repeating lessons they learned in there 70 years ago. I had no business stopping that evening, but I did. I had been coming back from Lubbock, a 2-hour drive behind me, and I saw the sagging shape on the horizon like a black tooth on the land. My grandmother used to talk about the place. She'd grown up just outside Post and remembered kids walking to that little schoolhouse in the 40s. She said it closed suddenly without warning, sometime before she was a teenager. When she was older, she would never say why, just that some places don't hold people right. My mother said it was because the county ran out of funds, but I always caught a look in my grandmother's eyes whenever the subject came up that told me it was something more. And because I was tired and curious and maybe a little reckless, I pulled over on the shoulder and let the wind wash over my truck. The first thing I noticed was the silence under the wind. Out there, miles from any real town, you expect to hear the endless summer chorus of cicadas or the faint groan of oil pump jacks working in the distance. Instead, there was nothing but the whistle of air through cracks and broken glass. I shut the truck door and walked across the gravel ditch to the gate. The old wire fence was barely knee-high and bent enough in places to step over. The earth was dry and crusted. Prairie dog mounds dotted the lot, though none of the animals showed themselves. They must have felt me coming. When I stepped inside, the schoolhouse, the smell hit me. Old dust, rot, and a faint sweetness that reminded me of damp chalk. The floorboards groaned under my boots, and the air inside was cooler than it should have been. The place was small, just a single room with rows of ruined desks, some still upright, most collapsed. Sunlight angled through the broken windows and caught the dust, making it glitter. On the far wall, the chalkboard was still there, though warped and cracked. I thought I could make out faint lines on it, ghostly equations and scrawled words that the wind hadn't quite erased. The longer I stared, the more I thought I could see them shifting, as though the chalk was fresh and some invisible hand was still pressing against it. Then I heard it. Faint at first, like an echo buried deep in the wood, then clearer. A child's voice reciting something slow and deliberate, the way you do when you're made to stand and repeat after the teacher. A second voice joined, then more, overlapping and weaving together until the air was full of a classroom that no longer existed. My scalp tightened, and every instinct in me told me to leave. But instead, I stayed. Maybe because I wanted to understand what my grandmother had meant. Maybe because the sound was strangely hypnotic, carrying me back to a time I never knew. The voices rose, and then I heard something deeper, heavier, like a man's cough or a shuffle of boots across the floor. The air grew colder, and I could feel sweat bead under my collar, even though my skin prickled with gooseflesh. The chalkboard shifted again. This time I knew I saw it, letters crawling across the surface in faint white lines. They weren't random. They spelled out words, but not in any child's hand. The writing was sharp, angular, too deliberate. My name appeared scrawled across the board in lines of chalk that hadn't been there a moment before. I staggered, back, knocking into a desk that collapsed under my weight. The sound silenced everything, and the air hung heavy, waiting. Then, as if released, the whisper of children's lessons filled the room again, only louder now, harsh, too fast, as though the words weren't for teaching but for chanting. Something in the sound scraped against my nerves. It wasn't just children. There was something else behind their voices, something that spoke through them. I turned to leave, but the doorway looked darker than it should have. The light outside had dimmed, clouds dragging across the sun. The path to the truck looked a little farther than it had been. As I crossed the room, I felt eyes on me. I glanced back, and for an instant I saw the classroom hole, the desks filled, small heads bent over open books, a teacher at the front with his back to me, writing something on the chalkboard. They were pale outlines, translucent, but their movements were smooth, alive. The teacher's head twitched like he had heard me. He started to turn. I didn't wait to see his face. The wind outside was stronger, carrying grit that stung my skin. I stumbled back over the fence and into the ditch, my boot catching on loose rock. When I looked up, the prairie dogs had surfaced, dozens of them, standing upright in perfect stillness, all facing the schoolhouse. Not one moved, not one made a sound. I scrambled into the truck, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine coughed before catching, and as I pulled away, I thought I heard something slam against the inside of the building, like a door or a heavy book hitting the floor. I didn't look back until I was miles down the road, and even then the horizon behind me felt wrong, as though the sky sagged lower over that patch of land. That night I dreamed of chalk dust. It poured through my house like smoke, filling my lungs, and in the haze I heard those voices again, reciting in a language I didn't know. When I woke, there was grit on my pillow, white against the sheets. I brushed it away and told myself it was just plaster, maybe from the ceiling. I tried to believe that, but I couldn't stop thinking of the writing on the board, the way it had formed my name like it had been waiting. I don't drive FM 402 anymore. If I have to go that way, I take the longer loop around through the highway, adding 30 minutes to my trip just to avoid that stretch. I tell people it's because the road is bad, full of ruts and gravel that eats at your tires, but that's not the truth. The truth is, I know the place isn't empty, and whatever sits in that schoolhouse remembers the names of anyone foolish enough to step inside. The strangest part is what happened last week. I found a scrap of paper under my windshield wiper when I left work. At first I thought it was a flyer, but when I unfolded it, I saw the same handwriting from the chalkboard. It was my name, written over and over until the page was covered in white dust that smeared onto my hands. There was no note, no explanation, just my name. I burned it in the sink that night, but even in the flames, the chalk didn't flake away. It burned hot and left a smell that clung to the walls for hours, the same faint sweetness I'd smelled in the schoolhouse. And sometimes, when the wind's just right, I swear I hear it again outside my window. The high, thin chant of lessons long after the teachers left. The backroads around Nacogdoches always had a different kind of silence, the sort you couldn't find along the main highways where the hum of trucks and the shriek of tires kept the world awake. Out there, the trees pressed in close, pine needles, dripping with humidity, and the pavement turned to patched blacktop where county workers had done what they could with too little money. Hollow Creek Crossing sat a few miles outside of town, a low stretch where a one-lane bridge crossed a sludgy, brown creek. Folks who grew up around there told you to avoid it at night, not because of crime or drunks, but because of something older, the kind of story whispered between cousins at sleepovers, the kind parents dismissed but always with that nervous hesitation, as if they didn't want to say too much. I first heard about it from a buddy who swore his uncle had driven across late one September evening and pulled over on the other side shaking so bad he couldn't work the gear shift. He claimed he'd heard a child crying under his tires, and when he'd looked at his windows, there were small wet handprints smeared across the glass as though something had tried to climb in. The uncle never drove that road again, and my buddy retold the story with just enough conviction that I couldn't shake it. I didn't live far from there, and the idea worked its way into me until curiosity pushed me where common sense should have pulled me back. That night was thick with East Texas air, the sort that smelled like pine resin and wet soil. Crickets buzzed, and somewhere deeper in the woods a bullfrog croaked like it was warning me off. I was alone, driving my old Ford down the back road, the headlights cutting a pale tunnel through the pines. The radio picked up nothing but static. When I reached Hollow Creek Crossing, I slowed. Not because the bridge needed it, it was short and sturdy enough, but because the story had already taken root in me. I let the truck roll forward, my tires thumping softly across the planks. That's when I heard it, faint at first, so faint I thought it was in my head. A child's whimper, thin and broken, rising from somewhere beneath me. My chest tightened. I pressed the brake and leaned forward, straining to hear. The cry came again, muffled like something under the wood. The wheel trembled under my hands, and I realized I was holding my breath. That was when the first handprint appeared. I swear, it pressed against the passenger side window, small and pale, fingers spread wide, smearing downward as though dragged by water. My gut dropped. Another followed on the driver's side, then two more on the windshield, all too small to belong to anyone older than 10. My instinct was to throw the truck into reverse, but when I glanced in the mirror, there was nothing, only black, as if the world behind me had been swallowed. The cries grew louder, closer, until it felt like the sound was bubbling up inside my own ears. I gunned the engine and shot across the rest of the bridge, tires shrieking against the damp wood. The handprints stayed. Even after I'd cleared the crossing, after the bridge had vanished behind the trees, the glass remained smeared with streaks that glistened like something wet. I pulled over under a sagging oak, heart hammering, and climbed out. The night air hit me heavy, but what made me stagger was the silence. The crickets were gone, the frogs too. All that was left was the faint trickle of Hollow Creek somewhere behind me. I circled the truck with my flashlight, shining the beam across the windows. The prints were still there, pressed hard enough that I could see the ridges of tiny fingers. They weren't dusty marks either. They glistened as though fresh with moisture. I touched one and yanked my hand back. It was cold, colder than glass should have been in that sticky night. I didn't go back across. I drove the long way home, through roads I barely knew, every mile thick with the sense that something had ridden with me, just outside the edge of the headlights. I parked the truck in my driveway and sat there for a long time, listening, watching, waiting for something to move. The prints were still there, pale and accusing. When I checked again the next morning, they were gone. Not just faded, but gone, like the windows had been wiped spotless in the night. I told myself I imagined it, that fear and old stories had twisted into something my brain made real, but deep down I knew better. The cries still come back to me, usually when I'm alone in bed and the house has settled into that awful quiet. I hear them faintly, muffled and wet, and every time I pass Hollow Creek Crossing in daylight, I catch myself speeding up, eyes fixed, straight ahead, because even then, even with the sun blazing down, I can see the shimmer of little handprints in the corner of my vision, waiting for the dark. And the part that gnaws at me most is this: those prints weren't made by one child. There were too many crowding over one another, desperate to be seen, desperate to get inside. And I can't help but wonder if the next time I hear them, the glass won't be enough to hold them back. Rust Creek Cemetery sits out in that empty stretch of desert between Pecos and Fort Stockton, far enough from both towns that the road out there feels like it doesn't belong to anyone. The mesquite grows thick and dry along the fence line, the kind of brush that rattles when the wind comes and there's no sound but the faint hum of the highway miles behind you. The ground there is the kind of West Texas soil that cakes up when it rains but cracks like old skin when the sun bakes, which is nearly all the time. The cemetery itself is little more than a scattering of headstones and rusted crosses, some leaning, some broken, most of them sinking deeper every year, like the earth doesn't want to give them back. They say the graves out there were dug, shallow back in the late 1800s, when a fever wiped through a settlement that isn't even marked on the map anymore. No church, no town, no marker of who lived there, just the cemetery and a dirt track that takes you to it if you know where to look. I first heard about the place from an old oil field hand named Cordero. He told me one night over coffee in Pecos that the ground at Rust Creek never gave back what it swallowed. They go down a little deeper every year, he said, stirring sugar into his cup. Not just the stones either. You leave something out there, it won't be there the next time. Fencing, flowers, beer bottles, doesn't matter. The dirt eats it. He said he'd seen it happen himself when a cross he'd set for his uncle sank until only the top showed, and even that had gone the year after. He wouldn't go back anymore. Said it wasn't right to hang around there at night, because sometimes you could hear something under the ground, shifting like cattle moving, in a stock trailer, bumping up against each other in the dark. That kind of story stays with you. I didn't go looking for the place right away, but once you start driving those roads between Pecos and Fort Stockton, you can't help but notice where the brush parts in a way that looks deliberate. One evening late in October, I followed a dirt path off Highway 285 just south of Toyaval. It twisted through low mesquite and cactus until I came to a gate made from old oil pipe welded together. The fence leaned, its wire rusted brittle, but the gate still swung easy. Beyond it, I saw the headstones. They were arranged with no clear order, some marked with names, most just carved slabs or wooden markers long gone gray. The ground was uneven, the stones sinking at angles like they were being tugged from below. It was quiet out there in the way desert places are, with that long, hollow silence that makes your ears strain for sound. The sun had just gone down and the sky still burned pink over the horizon, the last light catching on the tops of the stones. I walked between them, reading what names I could: Hernandez, Keller, Ruiz. One marker was just a flat piece of limestone with Mother scratched into it. Another had no name at all, just a date, 1886. The ground felt soft in places, though it hadn't rained in months. My boots sank just a little, as if the dirt below had been turned over not long ago. I stayed longer than I should have. That place doesn't let you keep track of time. Shadows come fast in the desert, and soon the cemetery was wrapped in it. That's when I heard the first sound. It was faint, like a low creak of shifting earth, but steady. At first I thought it was a rattler under the brush, but this was deeper, a dragging sound as though something heavy was moving just under the soil. It came from near the back corner where a cluster of old iron crosses leaned together, their bases already swallowed halfway down. The sound rose, slow and grinding, like a coffin lid sliding. I told myself it was just the ground cooling and settling, but when I walked closer, I saw the soil moving, not shifting from wind, not crumbling from a rabbit burrow. The dirt itself seemed to sink as if something below had pulled it down. The nearest cross tilted farther until it pitched forward, the top bar swallowed. I felt the hair on my arms rise. I backed away, but the sound followed, low groans moving beneath the ground in a line, as though something crawled through the soil just under the surface. I went back to my truck and drove off, leaving the gate open behind me, gravel spraying as my tires hit the road. Even on the highway I could feel it under me, that sense of hollow ground. I tried to put the place out of my head, but once you've seen something like that, it doesn't let you. I told a few people in Pecos what I'd seen, and most laughed it off. But one older woman, Maria Lopez, pulled me aside. She said her grandfather used to warn the kids to stay away from Rust Creek. The land there had been cursed by the dead, she said. Not because of the fever itself, but because of the way the bodies were buried. Too many at once, too fast, dumped into shallow graves. She said some were still alive when they went in, burning with fever and coughing blood, thrown in with the dead because no one wanted to risk another touch. They went into the ground still breathing, she whispered, and her eyes were wet when she said it. And they don't forget. The next time I went out there, I brought a lantern. It was foolish, I know that now, but there's a part of you that wants proof, something solid to hold against the fear. I parked outside the gate and walked in, light swinging across the crooked stones. The air smelled strange, metallic and sour, like old water sitting in a trough too long. I set the lantern on one of the stones and crouched to touch the ground. It was soft again, even though the sky had been clear for weeks. My hand pressed in easily, and the dirt seemed to cling, pulling down around my fingers like it wanted to take more. I yanked my hand back and wiped it against my jeans. The groan came again, this time from several places at once, a chorus rising beneath me. The lantern flame trembled, though there was no wind. Then I saw movement. The ground bulged between two stones, lifting slightly before sinking back. Another swell came just behind me, the dirt rippling like something swimming through it. I grabbed the lantern and backed toward the gate, heart pounding. Behind me I heard another stone fall with a dull thud as the ground took it. The flame flickered harder and I realized the air had gone colder, sharp against my skin. That's when I heard it. A voice. Faint at first, almost like the cry of a coyote far away, but closer, clearer with each second. A moan stretched into, words not loud but steady, rising up through the dirt. Help! The sound dragged long and hollow, stretched like it came through a mouthful of soil. Another voice joined it, then another, until the ground seemed to hum with them. Dozens of voices, some crying, some whispering, some gasping short, wet breaths. They weren't in any one place but everywhere, surrounding me, pressing in from below. I don't remember opening the gate or starting the truck. I just remember the tires kicking dust and my chest hurting from how hard I was breathing. The voices followed me out to the road, faint under the roar of the engine, carried in, the hollow thump of my tires over the dirt. By the time I hit pavement, the sound was gone, but the smell stayed in my nose, that metallic rot that made me gag. It's been months since then. I haven't gone back, though I think about it every night. Sometimes I dream of the place, of the ground swelling and pulling me under, of hands pressing up through the dirt to grab at my ankles. I wake with the sheets twisted tight, heart pounding, sweat cold on my skin. Last week I drove past the turnoff. I didn't slow down, but I saw the brush parted just the same as before. The gate was gone. Where it had been stood nothing but a line of posts, the ground around them sunken. I don't know if someone took it down or if the earth claimed it too. I kept driving, but in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw lantern light, faint and trembling among the stones. Rust Creek. Doesn't let go. The gravestones sink deeper every year because the ground there is still hungry. It took them once, those poor souls, and it will keep taking until there's nothing left above the surface. And maybe one night, when the voices rise again, it'll find something living to pull down, to make sure it's never forgotten. The iron windmill stood out there on the prairie like a skeleton, tall and rusted, its blades groaning against the sky whenever the wind pushed through. Folks driving the highway west of Midland sometimes saw it leaning on the horizon, its silhouette cutting against the dusk, and swore it looked more like a thing alive than a piece of farm machinery. I first heard about it from a man in a bar off Route 20, someone who said his cousin's son had gone camping near there and never came home. He told me the sheriff found nothing but the boy's truck parked by the mesquite scrub, the sleeping, bags spread out by a blackened fire ring, and the windmill creaking slow as if it were mocking them. That stuck in my head more than it should have. A week later, I drove out there myself. The prairie was flat in every direction, nothing but waves of yellow grass and the occasional stand of thorny brush, the kind of land that makes you feel exposed. I parked by a rusted gate, chain hung loose, and walked toward it. The closer I got, the more I realized how wrong it looked. The tower was taller than most windmills I'd seen, too tall for the size of the base, and the blades didn't catch the wind so much as resist it, like each turn hurt. The sound carried, a hollow moan that rose and fell louder when the gusts cut sharp, until it seemed to push right into my ears and chest. Standing there, I could swear the air grew heavier around me. I set up camp just as the sun slid down low. The sky in West Texas stretches forever, burning orange at the edges, fading into deep purple above. My fire sputtered with dry wood I'd brought, because out there you can search an hour and find nothing but mesquite branches too green to burn. After a while, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and that endless groan of the windmill. I tried to ignore it, but it seeped into everything, rattling in the back of my teeth. I walked closer, firelight flickering behind me, and put my hand on the tower's leg. The whole thing vibrated faintly, as if something deep underground moved with each creak. I pulled back quick and told myself it was just the metal shifting, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like a pulse. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Not mine, not the shifting of animals in the grass. Heavy, slow, like boots dragging. I turned with my flashlight, but the prairie was empty. The sound stopped when the beam swung, then picked up again behind me, circling, always just outside the edge of the light. My fire hissed low, and in the silence between each gust of wind I could hear whispering, faint and scattered, as though more than one voice carried on the air. I called out, angry just to drown out my own fear, but nothing answered. Only the windmill groaned louder, its blades turning against a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. When I crawled into my sleeping bag, the whispers didn't stop. They pressed against the canvas of my tent like fingers tracing the fabric. Then the sound shifted, and I heard it clear, my own name, spoken low and drawn out. I sat up fast, unzipped the flap, and shined my light. Empty grass, flat and endless. Only the windmill stood, its blades caught still for a moment before jolting into motion again. I swore I saw something hanging from one of them, a shape like a man's coat whipping before vanishing when the blade turned. I didn't sleep. The next morning I packed up and left, but the memory of it gnawed at me. I told myself I'd imagined most of it, nerves getting the better of me in an open field. But I couldn't stop thinking of those footsteps, of hearing my name when no one was there. I started asking around. People in town didn't say much, just a shake of the head or a muttered word about keeping clear. One woman told me her brother and two of his friends had gone missing camping out that way back in '94. Another swore she'd seen lights at the base of the tower, pale green like lanterns swaying. No bodies were ever found, only empty camps, and each time the sheriff gave up after a week or two because there was nothing to go on but prairie and wind. I went back again a month later. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me wanted to prove it was just stories. This time I didn't camp. I just drove out at dusk and parked where the dirt track ended. I left the engine running. The windmill was darker now, almost black against the fading light. I stared at it through the windshield, watching the blades shudder, And I swear I saw figures between them just for an instant, thin bent shapes that seemed to pull with the groan of each turn, like they were climbing out but never reaching the top. My headlights flickered and the radio cut to static. I put the truck in gear and left before I could see more. They say out on that prairie sound carries forever. I think it's the opposite near the windmill. Sound doesn't carry. It gets swallowed. That's why you can scream and no one hears. That's why when those campers vanish, there's never a trace. No dogs barking, no gunshot, no struggle. Just a campfire gone to ash and that moan drifting for miles. Some nights when the wind's right, I think I hear it even here in town, like the prairie's trying to remind me. And I know one thing for certain. If you hear the groan of that iron windmill close, you're already too far in. The rodeo grounds in Kerrville sat quiet most nights, tucked back off Highway 16 behind a weathered chain-link fence and a padlocked gate that rattled whenever the wind pushed through the hills. Folks drove past it every day, maybe noticing the peeling paint on the wooden sign that still promised the Hill Country Stampede, even though that show hadn't been held in years. But hardly anyone gave it a second thought, except me. Because I'd been there after midnight and I know what moves inside that arena when the rest of town is asleep. It started as a dare, the kind of foolish thing men in their 20s do to prove they're braver than they are. My buddy Chris had been drinking with me out on the back porch, and sometime around 10 he brought up the old stories our fathers used to whisper, about how the rodeo grounds weren't just abandoned, but cursed. He said his uncle had worked the gates back in the 70s when a rider was killed during a bronc ride, trampled so badly the dirt had to be dug out and replaced. They say the horse panicked when the chute opened, bolted in a blind fury, and that the sound of the man screaming carried across the whole fairground. Chris claimed the horse wasn't right afterward either, like its eyes never blinked, and when they finally shot it, the carcass wouldn't stiffen like it should have, even days later. Stories, right? The kind that get passed down in bars until they lose shape and meaning. But that night, with the whiskey burning in our guts, we decided we'd see for ourselves. We drove down Main, out past the courthouse square where the lights dim early, and onto the darker stretch that leads toward Bandera. The rodeo grounds sat back off the road, a low cluster of wooden bleachers around a pen that sagged inward like it had been leaning too long. When we pulled up, the place looked dead. No sound but the buzz of summer cicadas and the faint groan of trees rubbing against each other. The gate was rusted but not locked. Chris shouldered it open, and the hinges shrieked like they hadn't moved in years. I remember how the air felt heavier the second we stepped through, like crossing some invisible line. I told him then that maybe this was a bad idea, but he just grinned, teeth white in the dark, and walked ahead with his flashlight sweeping wide arcs. We climbed the bleachers first, the boards creaking under our boots. Sitting up there, you could see the whole pen spread out, the chute still standing crooked at the north end, the dirt inside the ring pale in the moonlight. I swear the ground looked strange, darker in circles like something had been pressed there recently, though. The place hadn't hosted a rodeo in over a decade. Chris laughed it off, called it shadows, but I kept staring because some of the marks weren't random. They looked like hooves. We sat quiet for a while, just listening, and that was the first time I heard it. A faint metallic clank, like a gate swinging loose. Chris froze too because he heard it as well. His light snapped toward the chutes, but nothing moved. We waited, the night thick around us, then came another sound, soft but steady. The crunch of dirt shifting, circling like weight dragging through sand. It was unmistakable. Hoof steps. My chest tightened, and every hair on my arms rose. But there was nothing inside that pen. Nothing our eyes could catch. Chris wanted to get closer, to see if maybe an animal had slipped in. Against my better judgment, I followed him down. The arena dirt was dry and loose, puffing up around our boots. But as we neared the center, it started to feel damp, like moisture seeped up from beneath. He swung his light across the ground, and I swear to you, the beam caught fresh imprints. Deep, clean-edged horseshoes pressed into the earth. They circled in a slow loop, one after another, leading around us. But there was no horse, nothing casting a shadow. The sound rose as if answering the light. An angry snort, the hiss of breath forced through flared nostrils. I felt it before I heard it. Hot air rushing against the back of my neck, though nothing was behind me. Chris muttered a curse and backed toward the chute, his flashlight jittering in his hand. Then, sudden and violent, the gates at the north end slammed open. Not with the lazy swing of old hinges, but with force, like something powerful had burst free. The noise cracked across the grounds, and the dirt under our feet rippled as though something massive was charging. I don't remember running, only that 1 second I was staring into the empty pen, and the next I was vaulting the fence, tearing splinters from the wood in my haste. Chris was right beside me, his face pale, eyes wide with terror I'd never seen in him before. We sprinted across the lot to the truck, and even there the sounds followed. The thunder of hooves, circling, relentless, chasing the night air. When I fumbled the keys, I swear I saw the dust rising in spirals where nothing stood, as if a horse paced only yards away. I got the engine turned, and we tore down the road, not looking back until the arena lights that should have been long dead, suddenly blazed behind us, glowing in the rear view like the grounds had sprung alive again. Chris never went back. He won't even drive that road at night anymore. He says he dreams sometimes of being inside the pen, trapped in the loop of hoofprints, the sound of the chute opening again and again. Me, I try not to think about it, but I've caught myself driving past on purpose, watching from the shoulder. And more than once, around midnight, I've seen the gates swing open by themselves, metal clanging across the valley, while dust stirs inside the ring in wide, endless circles. I've heard locals blame coyotes or kids messing around, but I know better. That arena doesn't stay silent after dark. It never will. I think about the old story of the rider crushed under his own horse, the dirt dug out in chunks and carted away. They say the earth remembers blood, that it holds onto suffering like a stain, and sometimes maybe it doesn't let go. El Paso sits wide and low against the desert, the mountains pressing on one side, the Rio Grande cutting its slow border on the other, and between it all, the sun-bleached bones of a dozen industries that rose and died out there. On the far edge of town, beyond where the neighborhoods peter out into stretches of mesquite and rock, there's a freight yard no one uses anymore. The rusted tracks split and crisscross in tangled webs. Cargo cars sit abandoned and tagged with layers of graffiti, and weeds crawl up between the ties. Some folks say the rail company pulled its crews out back in the 90s when the newer line cut south, but the skeleton of the place stayed, gathering dust, junk, and shadows. I worked nights for a delivery outfit when I first heard about it, dropping off packages at warehouses that backed onto the yard. The men on the docks would shake their heads and tell me not to hang around too long after dark. They said you could hear trains when no trains came, that the yard lit up with sparks and screeches in the dead hours, engines roaring, brakes squealing, but nothing ever rolled in. At first I figured it was just wind playing tricks, steel creaking against itself like an old house settling. But then one summer night when I cut through the edge of the yard to shave time off my route, I heard it myself. The sound rose up from somewhere deep in the network of rusted tracks. Metal shrieked like something immense was grinding to a halt, the air shaking with it, but when I looked out, nothing moved. Just the empty sprawl of cars with busted windows and the far-off glow of El Paso's streetlights. I got out of there quick, telling myself it was an echo from the main line that still ran a few miles south. Except the sound hadn't carried. It had pressed in all around me, so close it felt like it was clawing at my chest. The stories got worse the longer I asked around. A warehouse guard told me about seeing lights, headlamps cutting the dark, rolling through like a train was coming right down the yard, but no engine followed. A kid who used to tag boxcars said he saw figures moving between them, silhouettes, like men in long coats carrying lanterns, only they never made a sound. An older trucker swore one night he saw a whole locomotive ease through the yard, black as coal and without a single person on it, steam rolling off its sides even though the night was dry and hot as an oven. He said it didn't move right either. It didn't bend or sway, just slid forward like someone had set a toy on a wire. By then I should have known better than to go back, but I was 23, broke, and stubborn, the kind of stupid that thinks fear is just weakness to be beaten down. So one night, late July, I parked my van off the road and slipped through a hole in the chain link. The moon was high enough to spill silver across the tracks, The kind of light that makes everything look sharper, too sharp, like it might cut if you touched it. The air smelled of creosote and old rain baked into the wood. I carried a flashlight, but I kept it off, letting my eyes adjust. There was silence at first, wide and empty, and I thought maybe all those tales were just drunks, trying to scare me off. Then I heard it. Faint at first, like something heavy dragging in the distance. My heart jumped against my ribs as the noise grew into the steady rhythm of wheels grinding steel. I crouched beside an overturned car and stared down the main line. The air shivered. A headlight bloomed out of the dark, blinding, white and wide as a sun. I could see it. An engine, big and black, barreling right toward me. I scrambled off the tracks, stumbled into the gravel, waiting for the ground to shake with its weight, but it never did. The headlight passed close, a beam so strong I had to shield my face, and then it was gone. I swear to God, I looked up and there was nothing there. No engine, no cars, just the night swallowing itself again. The sound lingered a little longer, like brakes squealing, sparks flying, until even that fell away. I sat there in the dirt, breathing like I'd just run a mile, my throat raw from trying not to scream. The strange thing wasn't just that it had vanished. It was that in those seconds the headlight had burned over me. I'd seen the yard different. The cars weren't rusted or broken, the weeds were gone, and everything looked new, shining, with fresh paint. For a heartbeat, it was like I'd been pulled backward into some other time. And I thought I saw people too, shadows of men along the tracks watching me from the corners of my vision. But every time I turned, they slipped out of sight. I should have left right then, but I didn't. Some part of me felt hooked. Like once, you've caught sight of something wrong, you've got to follow it through. So I walked deeper into the yard. The air got colder the farther I went, not just cooler from the desert night, but sharp, biting cold that made me shiver even in the sweat of July. My breath smoked in front of me. I passed a string of old cars, their sides rattling as though something inside was banging to get out. I climbed up on one and peered through a busted window. The boxcar was empty, completely bare, just splinters of wood and rust on the floor. But the banging didn't stop. I leaned back and the sound carried on, steady, like fists hammering, from inside another world. I told myself it was rats, wind, anything, but deep down I knew better. Then came the whistle, long and low, splitting the night wide open. It rolled through me, vibrating in my bones, and I dropped to my knees with my hands clamped over my ears. It wasn't just loud, it was inside me, rattling my teeth, filling my skull until my vision blurred. When it stopped, the silence hit harder than the sound. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and stumbling. And then I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me, not mine. Slow, measured steps, crunching closer. I turned, but there was no one there. Just the empty line of cars stretching out into the dark. The steps carried on, circling me, but I couldn't see anything. My flashlight shook in my hand as I clicked it on, beam sweeping across empty rails and weeds. That was when I caught sight of something just at the edge of the light. A man's outline, tall, shoulders hunched, wearing a brimmed hat. He was standing in the space between two cars, staring right at me. His face was shadow, but his eyes glowed faint white like coals cooling in ash. I froze, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then he lifted his hand slow as a wave and pointed down the line. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. My beam swung where he pointed, and there was the train again. The same black engine, the same glaring headlight, only this time it wasn't silent. Screeches tore the night, sparks flared along the rails, and it looked like it was trying to brake but couldn't. It barreled forward, unstoppable, straight at me. I dove off the track, rolled in the dirt, and braced for the impact that never came. When I looked up, nothing was there. No headlight, no engine, no man in the brimmed hat. Just the broken yard, empty and silent. I ran. Didn't stop until I was back at my van, hands shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice before I got inside. I drove like hell out of there, didn't care if the cops saw me speeding. That night I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light, felt the heat of those sparks. The next morning I told myself I'd never go back. But here's the thing. Once you've seen something like that, you carry it with you. It sticks. I still hear trains some nights when I'm alone in my apartment, the walls rattling faint like steel on steel. Sometimes I wake up sweating with the sound of that whistle tearing my ears apart again. And once, just once, I swore I heard footsteps outside my door, slow and steady on the hall carpet. Same rhythm as gravel under boots. There's something wrong with that yard on El Paso's edge. Something that plays out over and over, a loop of ghosts locked into iron and dirt. The company can abandon it, the city can ignore it, but it's not empty. No crew disembarks, no whistles come from engines you can see, but the phantoms are still working. Maybe they don't know they're gone. Maybe they're bound there, tied to the tracks like chains they can't cut. All I know is if you hear the screech of a train where no train should be, don't go looking. Don't step foot on those tracks. Because once they know you've seen them, they don't let go easy. And if you're unlucky, one night you'll hear that whistle too close, too loud, and you'll look up to find that headlight bearing down. Only this time, maybe it won't vanish. Maybe it won't stop at all. I was headed south on Highway 277 late one night, the stretch that runs past Sonora, where the mesquite brush and limestone bluffs hem you in on both sides, and the radio gives up to static. I'd pulled over at the rest stop just past midnight, one of those isolated places with a couple of dim sodium lamps buzzing over picnic tables, a few vending machines with their insides glowing weakly, and a bathroom that smelled like bleach layered over something much worse. My plan was simple. Stretch my legs, splash some water on my face, and close my eyes for a while before finishing the drive toward Del Rio. It wasn't the kind of place you linger, but I was bone tired, and when you're that far from anywhere, a rest stop becomes a kind of oasis no matter how bleak it looks. I parked under one of the lamps, tilted my seat back, and told myself I'd rest just a bit. The sound of wind woke me, or maybe it was something else. My eyes opened slow, the dry burn of sleep still clinging, and that's when I saw him. A man was standing just outside my car window, his face pressed close enough that the glass fogged with his breath. The lamplight cast him in that yellow haze, making the hollows of his eyes and the lines of his jaw seem deeper than they should be. His clothes looked outdated, dark slacks, a button-up shirt tucked in too neatly, the sort of style that might have been normal 40 or 50 years ago. He didn't move, didn't tap on the glass, didn't smile. He just stared, head tilted slightly like he was trying to memorize my face. I froze, every muscle taut. My keys were in the ignition, but I was too scared to reach for them. My heart was hammering so hard that I thought he could see it through my chest. After what felt like forever, I blinked. That was all, just a blink. And when my eyes opened again, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound of gravel crunching away, no retreating shadow. Just gone. Like he'd never been there at all. I sat there, shaking, staring at the glass where the faint trace of fog still lingered. I tried to convince myself I'd dreamed it, some sleep-deprived hallucination. But sleep didn't come again, not with the feeling that eyes were still on me from somewhere out in the dark. At first light, I decided to shake it off by walking around. The air was cool, the highway empty, the mesquite whispering in the breeze. Behind the rest stop, past the picnic tables and a half-broken fence, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. A small patch of ground, sunken and outlined by a crumbling stone border. A grave. It was obvious the second I got close, though the marker was nothing more than a weathered chunk of limestone with letters carved into it by hand. The name was almost gone, but I could just make out John R. and the year 1938. A rest stop built right beside a grave. The unease from the night before crawled back over me in waves. I walked the length of the fence line and realized there were more, half hidden by weeds and brush. Small graves, forgotten ones like someone had simply paved over the memory of them when they built the stop. And in the quiet of the morning, with the sun burning off the mist, I could almost feel that man's eyes on me again, cold and insistent, like he was still waiting outside my car window, demanding that I remember him. Or maybe warning me that I wasn't supposed to leave. I did leave. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away faster than I should have, the empty highway unspooling before me like a lifeline. But I swear, Even as the miles put distance between me and that place, I could see him in the rearview mirror, standing in the road, watching me go. And I know one day I'll have to pass that stretch again, because in Texas, the highways always circle back, and some stops, no matter how hard you try to forget them, never let you go. The Rio Grande crossing near Los Ebanos was never a place I liked to drive through at night. But one summer evening I found myself pressed for time, cutting south from Eagle Pass and deciding to take the ford instead of adding the extra miles to a proper bridge. The air was thick and hot, mosquitoes already clouding around the windshield when I slowed and eased the truck down the sloping dirt road to the water. The current was low, not much more than waist deep where the tire ruts disappeared into the shallows. But the river had a way of looking deeper than it was, black as ink under the last light of dusk. I kept my foot steady, engine humming low, and tried not to think about the stories I had heard growing up. La Llorona, my grandmother used to warn, walked this river. She said the drowned wept on nights when the cicadas screamed loudest. I used to laugh at that when I was younger. But you get older and the idea of voices where there shouldn't be any starts to stick under your skin like a splinter. I was halfway across when the truck lurched. The water pressed harder than it should have, and the engine gave a cough before cutting off like someone had pulled the plug. The headlights dimmed, leaving nothing but the wet shine of the river and the black press of trees on either side. I tried the key again. Once. Twice. Hearing nothing but the shallow choke of a dead engine. The air felt thicker then, the heat turning wet. And I caught a sound that didn't belong. It was faint at first. The trickle of water against metal mixed with it, but it grew clearer with each breath. A woman's voice. She was calling, her words drawn out, muffled but urgent, like someone just beyond the bend. I froze, hand tight on the steering wheel, and felt the hair on my arms lift. She wasn't screaming. She was pleading. I thought maybe someone had slipped in, maybe one of the women who wash clothes near the banks, but there shouldn't have been anyone there that late. And certainly not in the middle of the river. The voice came again, closer this time, right up against the driver's side window, and it wasn't asking for help the way I expected. It was asking for children. "Give me your children," she said, her words low and wet, as if she had water filling her mouth. I looked around the cab instinctively, though I was alone. No kids in the back seat, nothing but an empty cooler and the faint rattle of loose tools under the bench. My throat closed tight, and I told myself it was a trick of the river, sound carrying from some far-off farmhouse. But when I leaned forward and glanced out the side mirror, I saw her. She was standing in the water not 10 feet away, pale in the dying light, her hair long and hanging heavy like weeds torn from the bank. Her dress clung to her body, old-fashioned, the color of river silt. She didn't walk through the water the way a living person would. She drifted, the current folding around her but never moving her legs, and her face was hidden behind strands of hair. She lifted her head slowly, as if it pained her, and I swear I saw her mouth stretch unnaturally wide as she spoke again. That same request, softer now, coaxing, like a lullaby turned rotten. I fumbled for the ignition, praying for the engine to kick over, but the truck was stubborn and lifeless. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the key. The woman drew closer, her arms lifting just enough to trail fingertips across the surface of the water, and every ripple she left behind pushed toward the truck like little reaching hands. My breath caught in my chest. She tilted her head, listening, and then smiled when the faintest sound came from behind me. It was impossible, but I heard it plain. Child's laughter. Light, quick, as if someone small was hiding in the back seat. I twisted around, my stomach dropping. Nothing there but shadows. When I turned back, she was pressed up against the window, her face pale and swollen, her eyes hollow sockets that dripped water down the glass. Her lips moved again. "Give them to me." I slammed my shoulder against the door, trying to lock it though. I already had, and the glass began to fog as if her breath were against it, though the window was sealed. The laughter rose again, this time at my right ear, and I felt the tickle of cold fingers brush my neck. Panic made me wrench the key harder than I should have, and with a groan, the engine coughed back to life, sputtering like it was choking on the river's grip. I I jammed the gear shift, tires thrashing under the water, and the truck lurched forward. I didn't look back, didn't dare glance at the mirror. All I remember is the sound of her wailing, sharp and furious, following me to the far bank, echoing against the trees until I hit gravel again and sped down the dirt road as fast as I could manage without spinning out. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station near Roma, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like salvation. I sat there shaking, staring into the rearview mirror at nothing but my own hollow-eyed reflection, and tried to breathe. But when I killed the engine, the silence pressed in again. From somewhere deep inside the cab, faint but clear, came the sound of a child's sob, muffled like it was coming from the trunk or hidden under the seat. I searched every inch of that truck and found nothing, yet the sound stayed with me the rest of the night. Some part of it has stayed ever since, as if something rode out of that river with me, waiting, patient, whispering in the quiet moments when I'm alone on the road. And to this day, I'll drive an extra 50 miles before I ever take that Ford again. West Texas nights have a way of making you feel like the whole world has slipped into some kind of forgotten corner. The land stretches flat for miles in every direction, and the sky is too big, too heavy, hanging over you like it might crush you if you look up at it for too long. Out there, outside of Midland, where the oil derricks blink like red eyes on the horizon, there are farm-to-market roads that don't see more than a handful of cars in a week. Locals know them, ranchers, and roughnecks use them, but they're the kind of roads that vanish off county maps. FM roads with faded signage, cracked blacktop that disappears into scrub and mesquite, and stretches where you'd swear you hadn't moved an inch even though the speedometer says otherwise. That's where they say the Devil's Mile runs, though. You won't find it named on any map, just whispered in bars when the beers are cheap and someone brings up bad luck. I didn't believe in any of it until I drove it myself. That night, I'd been coming back from Midland after dropping off a busted carburetor at a buddy's shop. It was late, pushing past midnight, and I wanted to take a shortcut home toward day. Stanton instead of swinging wide by the interstate. A coworker had mentioned an FM road that cut through ranch land and shaved 30 minutes off the trip. FM 1787, though the sign was half rust and leaning in the ditch. I should have known better. Locals always have shortcuts that cost more than they save, but I was tired, and the flatness of the highway had me fighting sleep. A crooked back road sounded like it might keep me awake. The first mile felt normal enough. Old asphalt, pitted in places, the kind of road where the stripes had worn away to nothing years ago. Mesquite and yucca crowded close to the shoulders, their shadows blacker than the night itself. I had the windows down a crack, desert air rattling in, dry and bitter. The radio couldn't pick up a station worth a damn, just static and the faint whine of something distant. I glanced down at the odometer out of habit. It ticked over at 77,842 miles. By the time I'd glanced again, maybe a minute later, it read 77,349. Too far, too fast. I chalked it up to distraction, the way you do when you're alone and tired. Numbers can swim in your head when you don't want to think too hard. But then came the signs. Or more accurately, the lack of them. FM roads usually cross others, have county markers, at least a gate or two leading to ranch property. This one didn't. Just mesquite. Just more road. After 10 minutes, I realized I hadn't seen a single mailbox or cattle guard. Nothing but cracked blacktop stretching into black night. I checked the odometer again. It had spun backward. 77,350, then 77,346, then 77,343, like a clock winding in reverse. I tapped the glass like that would fix it, but the numbers spun again, forward this time, climbing as if the truck were rolling downhill even though the road was flat. My stomach tightened. I slowed down, but it didn't matter. The numbers kept moving. That was when the headlights appeared in the rear view. Far off at first, a pair of high beams cresting the nothing behind me. Relief washed through me, stupid as that sounds. Another driver meant the road was real. The world was still stitched together. But the relief didn't last. Whoever was behind me closed the distance fast, way too fast, and the beams spread across the inside of my cab like daylight. I sped up, irritated, waving in the mirror for them to pass, but they just held steady, close enough that I could see the outline of a grill. An old truck maybe, though the make didn't register. Then without so much as a blink, the lights vanished. 1 second they filled my rear view, the next there was nothing. Darkness swallowed the road behind me like it had never been there. My throat went dry and I gripped the wheel tighter. That's when I noticed the road sign up ahead. Green, reflective, the kind that usually names the next county or gives mileage to the nearest town. My headlights caught it just enough for me to read the word. FM 1787. Same as the road I'd turned onto 20 minutes ago, and just past it the odometer clicked back to 77,342. The exact number it had been when I'd first looked down at the start. My stomach dropped. I had driven a loop. I didn't turn, I didn't double back. But there I was, back at the beginning. I pulled over hard, gravel spitting, and killed the engine. The night came rushing in, thick and heavy. Insects sang, coyotes barked somewhere far off, and the wind rustled the mesquite. Nothing out of the ordinary except for the silence between the sounds. The silence had weight, like someone holding their breath. I stepped out, boots crunching, and walked to the center of the road. The asphalt stretched in both directions, empty and endless. When I turned back toward my truck, the cab light flickered on by itself, though I hadn't opened the door. Inside, the radio hissed with static, but under the static, threaded thin as spider silk, came voices, children's laughter, a woman crying, men shouting, deep and garbled, like they were arguing underwater. I slammed the door shut and the sound cut off. I told myself I'd just drive fast, push through it, and sooner or later I'd hit a real highway. People get turned around in the desert. Maybe I'd looped without realizing. So I climbed back in, fired the engine, and gunned it. The odometer spun so fast the numbers blurred like a slot machine. My speedometer flickered between 30 and 90, though my foot didn't move. The radio popped with more voices, overlapping now, some whispering right into my ears even though no one was in the cab. Keep driving. Don't stop. He's waiting. That last one chilled me. He. I didn't ask who. The loop came again. The same sign, the same mile marker, the same broken yucca on the shoulder. Only this time something new stood by the road. A figure. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a brimmed hat. I couldn't make out a face, just a long shape darker than the night watching me pass. I didn't slow down. Couldn't. My hands locked on the wheel, and the figure slid past the edge of my headlights. The radio screamed, a high-pitched wail that made my teeth ache. When I risked a glance in the mirror, the figure wasn't alone anymore. 2 more stood with him, then 4, then a line, as if every time I looped, another had joined. Silent, still, waiting. By the 5th loop, my breath came in shallow gasps. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. I screamed at the windshield, at the road, at myself. None of it mattered. The odometer reset each time, the mile repeating, and the figures multiplied. They filled the shoulders, standing in neat rows, brimmed hats and shadows where faces should be. Some lifted hands to point, always forward, always down the road. My headlights cut across them, but they never moved otherwise. Just waiting. Just growing in number. I don't remember when the sun finally cracked the horizon. It was sudden, as if I'd blinked and the sky turned pale. The figures were gone. The road stretched clean and ordinary, and the odometer ticked like it was supposed to. I came out near Stanton, an hour later than I should have, my fuel tank nearly bone dry. I parked outside a diner and sat in silence, staring at the sun-baked asphalt, swearing I'd never drive that road again. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Every time I start my truck now, no matter where I'm parked, the odometer resets to 77,342 before climbing again. And twice, just as the engine turned over, I've caught the reflection of a brimmed hat in my rearview mirror, though there was no one behind me. Highway 79 cuts a lonely path between Palestine and Jacksonville, a stretch of pines and bottomland oaks where the air feels heavy, as if the trees themselves are keeping watch. Folks around town don't talk much about the old burned church. Out that way, though, everyone knows where it sits. Crouched 100 yards back from the road like a charred animal. Black timbers bent inward. The bell tower collapsed decades ago. They say the fire started in 1957 during a Wednesday night service. No one agrees on how many were inside. Some swear the whole congregation perished. Others claim only the preacher was lost, his body never found in the ash. Either way, the ruins have never been torn down. The land changed hands a few times, but no one ever built there again. Even in daylight, it feels wrong. At night, it pulls at you. I was driving back from Crockett late one summer evening when my truck's radiator needle started climbing into the red. I pulled over near the church because the road was empty, and I thought the cover of trees might give me some shade while I waited for the engine to cool. I cut the ignition and stepped out, cicadas drilling the humid air, the pine needles wet with dew that hadn't burned off. The smell hit me then, faint but sharp, like wet soot. I glanced toward the trees, and through the thinning dusk I could make out the dark silhouette of the church's skeleton, boards twisted, stone steps leading up to nowhere. I'd grown up hearing whispers about the place but had never stopped to look. I figured I'd take a peek, kill time, maybe see if the stories were just small-town nonsense. Walking up the overgrown path felt like crossing into a pocket of air that had been sealed off from the rest of East Texas. The crickets quieted the closer I got. The foundation still stood, black bricks flecked with white ash, though the ground should have long since washed clean in the rains. My boots left faint prints in the gray dust, as if the fire had just gone out. I felt heat rising from it, even though the evening air was cooling down. That's when I noticed it. Faint music drifting between the collapsed beams. At first I thought it was just the wind moving through the timbers, but then I recognized it. An old hymn. The kind my grandmother used to hum when she shelled peas on the porch. Only it wasn't right. The words were mangled, backwards almost. A congregation singing in reverse, syllables bending into themselves like a record spun the wrong way. I backed off a step, telling myself maybe someone had a radio playing in a trailer down the road, but there weren't any houses close and the sound was coming from inside the ruins. Against my better judgment, I climbed the cracked steps. The boards sagged beneath me but held, and as I stood where the pews would have been, the air grew, stifling. I could smell burned wood, singed fabric, even hair. The hymn swelled louder, not from above or below, but from all around, as if the walls were breathing the song out. I glanced down and saw a faint glow between the cracks in the floorboards. Like embers hidden deep, they flared for a second, pulsing, then dimmed again, leaving behind a trail of smoke that snaked up between my boots. A voice broke through the hymn, clear and close, though no one was there. It sounded like a preacher giving benediction, only the cadence was wrong. The words weren't scripture, though they mimicked it. Phrases about ashes rising, flesh unburned, light swallowed into smoke. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath, listening to words that pressed against my skull in a way no human voice should. I turned to leave, but the steps I'd taken in had vanished. Behind me stretched only charred boards leading deeper into shadow. I took another step and felt the wood shift. Then something moved under it, thumping hard like fists beating from below. I bolted toward the opening where the doors once hung. The moment my boots hit dirt, the sound cut off, and the cicadas returned, in a roar. The glow under the boards winked out, but the smell of soot clung to me like oil. My truck sat right where I'd left it, steam still curling from the hood. I told myself I'd imagined it, that heat and exhaustion had played tricks on me. I started the engine and it rattled to life, though the needle still hovered too hot. I put it in gear and pulled back on the highway, eager to get distance between me and that place. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, the church wasn't a ruin anymore. For a split second, it stood whole again, white clapboard walls gleaming, stained glass glowing from lanterns within. Through the open door I could see rows of people, their faces blackened and smooth, turned toward me as one. Then the mirror fogged with smoke, and when it cleared, the ruin was back, black timbers against the trees. I didn't sleep much that night, but when I finally drifted off, I dreamed of sitting in a pew. My skin stuck to the varnished wood, and the air was so thick with smoke I could barely see the pulpit. The hymn rose again, backwards and awful, and beside me, a figure leaned close. His face was gone, burned smooth, but his mouth moved, and I knew what he was whispering even though no sound came out. He was asking me to sing. I woke choking, my room filled with the same soot smell, my sheets damp with sweat. Out the window, the night was still but faint against the trees. I thought I saw a glow, like coals buried in ash. I don't drive that stretch of 79 anymore. If I have to head north, I take the long way around, even if it costs me an extra hour. Some places don't let go of what happened to them, and some fires never go out. The stretch of highway between Del Rio and Eagle Pass is mostly brush country, the kind of landscape where the mesquite trees knot themselves into dark, scraggly shapes, and the land rolls in a way that makes every bend in the road feel like it's hiding something. The asphalt is long and empty out there, with only the occasional set of headlights breaking the night. I drove that road more times than I can count when I was younger, hauling supplies back and forth for the ranch my uncle ran out near Quemado. It was one of those drives where the hum of the tires and the monotony of the scrub could lull you into thinking nothing out there could possibly be alive, let alone threatening. But I know better now. I know what I saw on one of those runs, and I've never shaken it. It was late fall, a night that carried more chill than usual for South Texas, the kind where the air has a dry bite to it, where the stars shine too clear, too sharp, as if the whole sky is watching you. I had just left Del Rio around midnight, after spending longer than I meant to at a feed store that doubled as a bar after hours. I wasn't drunk, just tired and restless, with the road stretching out ahead of me like a dare. That was when I saw her, a girl standing on the shoulder just outside of town, not far past a faded sign that warned about deer crossings. She wore a white dress, plain cotton by the looks of it, nothing fancy, nothing suited for the cold. Her hair was long and dark, and it lifted in the breeze like it didn't weigh much at all. She wasn't waving wildly, not like someone desperate, just one arm raised as if she knew I would stop. And I did. I don't pick up hitchhikers as a rule, but this was different. She looked about 18, maybe younger, and she was barefoot, the kind of sight that gets under your skin before your brain has time to argue. I slowed, rolled to a stop, leaned across the passenger seat and popped the door open. She didn't smile, didn't even hesitate. She stepped forward like she had already made up her mind. I heard the door creak, felt the weight shift on the suspension as if someone had started to climb in. But before the door latched, before I even turned my head, she was gone. Just gone. The door swung shut on its own, clicking into place as if nothing had touched it. My headlights stretched across empty brush, the pale gravel shoulder, and nothing else. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes had played a trick. But the road didn't let me off that easy. Not even half a mile further, I caught movement again, on the edge of the beams. Same girl, same white dress, same pale arm rising in that slow, certain wave. My knuckles locked on the wheel, my foot itched on the brake, but I didn't stop this time. I pressed harder on the gas, watching her vanish, in the rear view before I could blink. The glass picked her up differently than my eyes had. For just a second in the mirror, she wasn't standing at the roadside anymore. She was seated in the back seat, pale face half turned, hair falling across one eye, watching me like she had been there all along. And then the mirror was empty, nothing but the worn fabric of my old truck seat. The rest of that drive stretched into hours. Every bend of the highway, every shadow in the brush, I expected her to reappear. Sometimes I thought I heard a soft thump, like knuckles brushing against the glass of the passenger window. Other times it was a voice, not words exactly, more like the lilt of a hymn carried low under the hum of the engine. By the time I reached Eagle Pass, I was sweating despite the cold, and I pulled over at a gas station just to breathe, just to prove I was still real, still there. The attendant watched me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. I didn't tell him anything, Just paid for a coffee and sat under the buzzing fluorescent lights until I could convince myself the road was safe again. That might have been the end of it if it had just been me. Just one tired night and a mind playing tricks. But years later I was back in Del Rio, swapping stories with a cousin over beers, and the subject of that highway came up. He told me about a girl he'd heard of, a hitcher who showed up in white, always alone, always on cold nights. Folks said she was from Eagle Pass originally, some girl who'd died back in the 70s trying to get home from a dance. Her car had broken down near the river and she set out on foot. Never made it. Some said she was found the next morning in a culvert, body broken in ways the fall couldn't explain. Others claimed she was never found at all, just a white dress floating down the Rio Grande days later. My cousin laughed telling it, but I didn't laugh. I just stared into my drink, thinking about the way my passenger door had shut itself, the way her reflection had looked straight through me in that mirror. I've driven that stretch since then, though not often and never without unease. Once near dawn, I thought I saw her again far ahead, her figure barely a smudge against the pale gray sky. I didn't stop. I won't ever stop again. But the strangest thing isn't that she appears. It's that every time, without fail, the passenger door on my truck loosens just a little, as if it's waiting to open, waiting for her to climb in. I've had mechanics look at it, replace hinges and latches, swear it's fixed. But the next time I take that road, the door rattles, clicks, edges itself toward unlocked. Like it remembers her, like it wants her back. And sometimes, when I'm parked at home, when the night is cold and the wind carries that thin, sharp edge that belongs to the brush country, I hear the faintest sound in the driveway. A knock on glass, soft, patient. My curtains never show anything, but I don't go outside, because I know what waits out there. I know the highway doesn't let go once you've seen her. And sooner or later, I think that door's going to open, whether I'm ready for her or not. Highway 16 runs crooked through the hill country, the kind of two-lane stretch where live oaks lean heavy over barbed wire fences, and the limestone cuts show white scars along the ditches. I've driven it more times than I can count, headed between Kerrville and Bandera, but it was last April, in that warm spell before the storms rolled in, when I found myself on a back road I didn't recognize. The evening was dropping into that hazy blue where the sky still glows but the headlights start to matter, and I pulled off near a cattle guard to stretch my legs. That's when I saw the flowers. A field of bluebonnets spread across the pasture, like something out of a postcard, tall and thick, stretching all the way to the tree line. They were glowing faintly, not reflecting the headlights, not catching the sunset, but glowing on their own like foxfire does on rotting wood. At first, I thought it was my tired eyes or maybe some strange trick of the dust in the air. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't a trick. The flowers themselves gave off a pale light, soft and steady, not bright enough to read by, but bright enough to trace each row of them into the dark. I should have left right then, but I grew up in Texas, and bluebonnets are a kind of religion, here. Kids crouch down in them every spring so their parents can snap pictures. Whole families picnic among them. But nobody, and I mean nobody, talks about fields that glow after dark. My first thought was maybe some farmer had sprayed something strange, fertilizer or herbicide, and it was catching the light funny. So I unlatched the wire gate and stepped in. The air inside the field felt cooler, wetter somehow, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees the moment I crossed. Cicadas that had been buzzing near the fence cut off, leaving only the crunch of my boots in the grass and the faint rustle of flowers brushing against one another. I squatted down, plucked a stem, and held it up. The glow was in the veins of the petals, not the surface. I rubbed one between my fingers and the pale light smeared across my skin like pollen. That's when I heard the voice. Not loud, not even close, just a low murmur carried by the night air like someone speaking from the far end of a long hallway. I froze, my heart thudding, straining to hear. It wasn't words I could make out, just the cadence of speech, rising and falling, and it came from somewhere deeper in the flowers. I told myself it was the wind. But there was no wind. The oak stood still, The barbed wire didn't rattle, and even the moths that should have been circling the glow seemed absent. My gut twisted, every instinct telling me to get back in the truck, but something stronger kept me moving. I walked further in, pushing through the chest-high blossoms. The glow deepened as I went, casting my hands and arms in pale blue light, until it was almost like being underwater. That's when I noticed the ground wasn't flat anymore. It dipped, subtly at first, then more sharply, as if the whole field sloped into a shallow basin. And at the bottom of it I saw movement, at least half a dozen figures standing among the flowers, motionless, heads bowed. My first thought was they were kids out fooling around, maybe a college group from San Marcos or Austin. But they didn't shift, didn't glance up, didn't acknowledge me. They just stood there, and the voices I'd been hearing seemed to come from them. A dozen whispers overlapping like prayer spoken backwards. I should have run. I know that. But my feet kept going until I was close enough to see their clothes. Not modern. Faded dresses, suspenders, bonnets, the kind of stuff you'd see in an old daguerreotype. One man had a beard down to his chest and a hat that looked handmade. Another woman's dress was so worn the fabric had thinned near her shoulders, but none of them looked real. Their skin was pale as candle wax, and they gave off the same glow as the flowers. One of the women lifted her head then, and I saw her eyes. White, not blind but hollow, shining with that same eerie light. She opened her mouth, and instead of words, a rush of air came out like a sigh dragged too long. It was enough to snap me out of it. I stumbled back, crashing through the flowers, my boots tangling in stems, heart pounding. I clawed my way up the slope, breaking stems left and right, the glow clinging to my jeans and hands like wet paint. Behind me, the voices rose, not whispers now, but a hum, deep and insistent, the way a freight train sounds before it barrels. Past, I hit the fence hard, scraped my arms on the barbs, and tumbled to the gravel. My truck sat right where I'd left it, engine ticking cool. I fumbled with the keys, started it up and floored it, gravel spitting from the tires. In the rear view, the field glowed brighter, as if the whole thing had caught fire without flame. For miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the back seat, and I refused to look. Only when I crossed back into the stretch of 16 I recognized did the glow fade from my skin, leaving just dirt and scratches. I didn't sleep that night. I scrubbed my hands raw, but when I turned out the bathroom light, I swore I still saw faint blue veins running across my palms. A week later, I told a friend in Bandera about it. He grew pale, asked me where exactly I'd turned off. When I described the cattle guard and the cut of the hills, he shook his head, said his grandfather had warned him about that place. Back in the 1860s, a whole German settlement disappeared there. Men, women, children. Folks said Comanche raids, others said fever, but no bodies were ever found, just abandoned wagons and houses half-built. The land changed hands a dozen times, but no rancher held it long. Cows wandered in and never came out. Horses bolted when driven near. He told me to forget I'd seen it and for God's sake never go back. I promised I wouldn't. But last night, driving home late from Kerrville, I passed that same stretch of road. And for just a second, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the glow. Not faint, not subtle. The whole field alive with light. And standing at the fence line this time was a single figure, bonnet pulled low, face hidden. As I sped past, she lifted her head. Even through the dark and the dust on my windshield, I saw her eyes, and they were waiting.